All right. Well, here we are, Cape Bernot, Bryan Roth, myself, Michael Kiser from Good Beer Hunting, and more specifically, the Sightlines side of Good Beer Hunting, which is our news and analysis portion, some of which is free and open to the public on goodbeerhunting.com, and some of which is for our subscriber base, basically decision makers within the world of alcohol beverage. But today we're here to chat with you about sort of the process that we go through as a team, some of which you're probably going to say, like, this seems like I'm watching it live. That is going to be somewhat accurate. We operate, even pre-pandemic, we operate out of Montana, North Carolina, and me here in Chicago. And so this is basically what we do to figure out what we're pursuing next in terms of news and analysis and how it comes together. But we thought it'd be great to, when we were invited on, to share a little bit of the decision-making process and some of the themes that we've been exploring lately, to kind of use those as examples of how that process was underway, and give you a little bit of insight as to what it's like to be kind of a virtual newsroom in the world of beer as a trade organization or as a trade magazine, but also looking at the wider world of alcohol beverage. Bryan Roth is our editor on the Sightlines channel, and Cape Bernot is our lead reporter. And you can look at everything I say through the lens of the publisher, as the guy who used to write a lot of the content, but now is basically in charge of the platform. But with that kind of, I guess, set as context, Bryan, I thought I might come to you to kind of give us a little bit of an overview of what you thought we might chat about today and share with the folks who are watching.
Yeah, I think it's very fitting that I think alongside of us in a little bit, there's a presentation about making smoothie sour beers. As context for everybody watching now and later, kind of like a taste of the things that are both realistically interesting to us and then also, most important, interesting and important for all the people who subscribe to Sightlines. Like Michael said, these are people who are making decisions that ultimately make a difference of money and staffing and the way that people think about these things. And with so much change over the course of the last 18 months in the beer industry, especially looking back maybe even 2 or 3 years with kind of the onset of flavored malt beverages, hard seltzers, and things like that. A lot of what Kate and I have been focusing on lately have really been kind of 2 or 3 things. One, the role that FMBs, RTDs, hard seltzers in particular, are playing in the beer sphere, how that's all playing out in context of both COVID and post-COVID, as it were, as much as post-COVID as we can get. But then also what this means for beer, because we spend a lot of time talking and thinking about the outside categories and how they impact beer, but these also help to guide us with very clear insights on what we can talk about, what beer companies, beer producers, people who sell beer can do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the piece that we just put out, or that we will be putting out this week, is taking a pretty hard look at that RTD, that ready-to-drink market. And we can't point you to it yet because it goes out, I think, probably tomorrow morning, but you can anticipate it. But it's a really in-depth look at the role of RTDs, especially in this very, very disorganized space of flavored malt beverages. Like most people, I think, when they think of FMBs historically, if you've heard that term, you've probably heard it referred to as, Mike's Hard Lemonade. You might not realize that some of the adjunct imperial stouts that you're drinking are technically also classified as FMBs in some ways because of where their sugar comes from. It's not necessarily malt derived. I hope that's not a shock to anybody. But hard seltzers are really what are pushing those numbers sky high right now as a new category that's kind of above and beyond what we traditionally talk about with FMBs as a singular product category within FMBs. And so the numbers are kind of topsy-turvy. It's really hard to dice up what is growing and what is not in quote unquote beer these days, just because of how those things are classified. Kate, I know in your reporting that's something that you are constantly disambiguating.
Yeah, and sometimes the conclusion is that the lines don't matter. I mean, they matter, but the lines are so much less clear than they've ever been. So even when we're talking about FMBs, there might have been sort of a more recent understanding what that was with Mike's Hard Seltzer or Mike's Hard Lemonade, and things like Twisted Tea. But now, what about tea flavored seltzers, or what about tea flavored cocktails, hard kombucha is a tea. What, like the lines, even when we say something like hard tea, I feel like there needs to be brackets of like, this is what we mean with hard tea. And I think the reason that confusion is happening is because the experience on shelves for consumers is being so much more driven more by flavor than by category. So tea might be the experience that you're looking for, tea plus alcohol, but whether that's a hard kombucha or a hard seltzer or an FMB like twisted tea might not matter all that much to you in the scheme of things. So I think that makes our work more important than ever, because we're really breaking down the back end of that. And it takes a lot of work, but that's what is valuable about it, is kind of disentangling those pieces, or sometimes entangling them all together and seeing what insights come out of that.
And those are really two different lenses that you're kind of describing there, I think. One of which I hear as sort of like how drinkers are thinking of these things, right? Like what's cool and interesting, and what's cool and interesting about these things. That's one way to sort of like structure a narrative or an understanding for an audience. But when we come into Sightlines, we're also very much balancing those kinds of insights and needs for readership against people who are trying to make decisions about categories and distribution, and what are the attributes of a certain product category that have to be on the shelf in order for it to basically qualify as that in a consumer's eyes. And Bryan, I know that's kind of where you spend a lot of your time, is sort of in that macro level of like, how does this all shake out for someone who has to make a decision tomorrow, Tuesday, 9 a.m.? What are we moving forward with, and how are we even going to talk about that? Not just to consumers, but also to our entire value chain, our retailers, distributors, and our internal team. You're taking sort of a big step back often and trying to help people understand how all of those dots connect.
Yeah, the two most common phrases that I've used in the last like 9 months have been beverage alcohol and flavor experience. And I don't know if I realized at first, like mid 2020, why I was doing that. But it became very evident that it was led because of how much blurring there is. And I think it's so easy to think about consumers, alcohol consumers, in the three neat traditional categories that have long existed, with beer, wine, and spirits. And for a couple of decades now, the beer category has been having a rough go because of what spirits has kind of stolen away. And now it's not just those three categories, but we're talking about flavored malt beverages and all of the schisms there too, which include RTDs. When we talk about hard teas, people might immediately think of twisted tea. Top 25 individual brand in the United States, by the way, in IRI chain retail. There are lots of people who drink twisted tea, but even that category is changing. And that's something that we've written about in Sightlines, where someone may hear hard tea and think twisted tea, that's it, this kind of sugar bomb, alcoholic sugar bomb. But in reality, even in that category, it's breaking out into more boutique, specialized versions of what, a 5% alcohol tea flavored drink can be. And so, it's easy to always think about things in terms of IPA kind of dominates, and it does. But even when we look at what's working in beer right now, something as simple as fruit beer. And again, what Kate is talking about, that the expectations and experiences that drinkers are interested in, beer is there. But again, smoothie sour beer, like that may not be what the hook is for drinkers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way in which I guess you have to synthesize all that language, Kate, really comes down to you serve as sort of a translator, I think, between the consumer perception and the sort of business perception of those categories. In some of your recent reporting, where have you found people that really seem to be in touch with what consumers are looking at these things as? And vice versa, have you found people that seem to be talking like they're from another planet compared to how consumers are thinking about these things?
I think it's, I encounter both. There are, and I think there's, I certainly have sympathy for the latter camp, because if you're a producer and even if you're someone like us, a reporter who watches these categories, you think in categories, you think in these definitional and tax-based terms, because that's how data gets broken down, or that's how things get reported.
Or where your licensing comes from in some cases.
Yes, also that. So but it is so imperative to turn that part of the brain off and approach the shelf as the consumer and see what are they seeing. It's not like there are dividers in the grocery store and like big signs that are like FMBs or like RTD, like it's just there and it's a free for all. And the guiding principle that shoppers are working with, the motivation is, what is the experience that I want to have and what are the flavors that I associate with that? Why would the consideration of what how are these fermentable derived? I mean, that's not really like a motivating factor for me when I'm shopping, unless of course you have an allergy or something. But for most people, it's what's the experience, what's the flavor that's going to get me there. And it is really refreshing when I talk to alcohol beverage producers that are turning that switch on in their brain, and approaching it with, what is the lifestyle? What is the occasion? I had a really good chat with the folks from 50 West Brewing in Cincinnati this week about their new hard lemonade. And that was part of their thought process was, we want to play in FMBs, but we have to make something that makes sense for us. Like we don't want to, there's a million hard seltzers. Why would we make a hard seltzer? Lemonade made sense for them because they have this like Americana retro burger concept. And it was like, what goes with that? What flavor experience do you look for when you're eating a burger outside in the sunshine? Lemonade makes sense. We can tell that story. So people like that are inspiring to me and get my brain thinking along those same lines.
I mean, that's sort of the work that I not only on the Sightlines side, but on our studio side for the Feel Goods company, where I'm leading portfolio development, sometimes for multinationals and national craft brands and startups. That kind of starts to match a lot of the process that we're even going through on the brand building side. A recent case study for us has been Dominga from New Belgium. We've been working inside their specialty and innovation pipeline for a while now, and Dominga is sort of a New Belgium's singular attempt at navigating this new blurry space, right? So Dominga, if you haven't seen it, is a calamansi fruit, sort of tangerine-ish, sort of half lime-ish kind of flavor profile that's a blend of a pale ale and a food-or-age sour. And it's not being presented as if it's like a rarefied sour beer from one of the country's oldest producers of those things. It's not being presented as a pale ale of any sort. And we don't even necessarily have fruit on the primary packaging. It's being presented as this like orange mimosa-like experience. It's even called a mimosa sour. And a big part of that is this sort of cyclical learning experience that I think we have between the news and analysis that we're doing and then what we're experiencing sometimes on our studio development side of which is very of the moment and sort of cutting edge in terms of the problems that producers are trying to solve. And what we're seeing right now is that the positioning of that product, very much following the lead of the research and analysis we're doing, is it's outselling White Claw variety packs in some Whole Foods right now. It's already doubling its production estimates for the year, and it's all because it's based around a singular brand position and flavor experience that it's trying to communicate as directly as possible. We're following the research, Brian.
Yeah, I'll pause on that for a second, though, because I think it was a conversation between the three of us that hits at least what, to me personally, made that really interesting. Is that when that launched, I remember seeing on Twitter a lot of our peers, friends, other media in the beer and alcohol space basically asking like, oh, so it's a brunch beer. Like, it's a great idea. I don't know how it's going to sell. Well, no, this isn't a beer that's made to be drank between, 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. Saturdays and Sundays. The response that both you and Kate immediately highlighted in our discussion was like, yeah, but it makes you think like day drinking.
Yes, brunch is a flavor experience.
Yes, it's the flavor experience that extends to the expectation of the experience in a drinker's mind. And so, and again, like this comes back to the issue of thinking so hard in terms of categories and occasions, and that beer is this and why is that, and spirits is blah blah blah. Because and this was something that we highlighted in a recent newsletter. If you look at the way that drinker demographics have been shifting over the last 5 years, that the traditional white male consumer has been drinking less and less, and basically everybody else has been drinking more.
Yep.
And what that means is that more people with a wider collection of life experiences, backgrounds, and interests have a wider selection of options than ever before. And so both in terms of practice and necessity, almost thinking about that flavor experience idea just becomes something that has to be caked into a business plan. That certainly there are examples of companies across those three traditional categories that are killing it. And they don't have to change anything they do. And maybe it's just a white space they can play in a little bit, but it's going to be there waiting. And it's always going to be there. And the thing that we can see, every time we look at the data, every time the three of us have a conversation, is that change is just that continual slow roll. And there's no evidence to suggest that it's going to go backwards.
Right. Yeah.
What I mean, when you say, Brian, is beer is just vibes now? Like, and one of the things about Domingo that I think was great is that in that day drinking, that large day drinking sort of, do not play with the squeak toy. In that large day drinking space, I mean, that means so many different things. So like you were saying, so many different demographics. Like it could be brunch, it could be drinking with food, or it could be mowing the lawn, it could be going for a hike, like day drinking, it could be sports tailgating, like all of that has very different connotations. And if you create something that has applicability to all of those, people can make it their own.
Yeah.
Different connotations to different people in every different way, right? And so this killed me when, we've been talking about, flavor experience for some time, but there was a conversation that I had with Jason Perkins, the beloved, renowned brewmaster for Allagash Brewing, back a couple months ago. And he said that's what Allagash is doing in terms of their own thinking about product development now. They are not specifically thinking about it in terms of ingredients. That's part of their development process because that's who they are. But when they think about something new and when they talk to and solicit ideas from employees, it now starts from a discussion of what flavor experience is and what that end intention is, not necessarily, what hops can we use, and they do a great job sourcing local grain and things like that. But there is always this higher level conversation now that takes place for one of the most successful, most beloved, longest tenured craft brewers in America.
Yeah. I mean, I think this conversation is very, very reflective of how some of these stories end up coming together. It's like a synthesis of a few different things, right? It's looking at historical data and analysis of and trying to derive insight as to what these kind of like macro behaviors are over time within beer and beyond. And it's built on the reporting that Kate is doing and talking to people on the ground about how they're thinking about these things, both on the consumer and producer side. But then it's also being derived from the experience we have on our studio team side from Feel Goods Company. Where we're actively building some of these products and brands and pipelines for other companies, and the community of Sightlines made up of those decision makers. We have a Slack channel where they all exist, and we talk to each other, and they share anecdotal sort of, I don't want to say evidence, but like narrative or anecdotal, moments of them actively trying to solve these problems for themselves and what they've learned from that. And so there's just like, there's this analysis, there's insight development, and then there's just community development around what some of those narratives are really all about. And all of that kind of comes together into this like synthesis around a big topic. And so when we release a story like we are this week on RTDs and FMBs, it's really like the one thing you're going to need to read to make decisions about those things probably in this quarter. Like that's what they're meant to be. They're not just like these small little blurbs along the way. They're meant to be sort of like the synthesis of everything you're going to need to understand in order to make a smarter quality decision for your business. And this is how we get there, is through dialogue like this.
Yeah, the RTD chat that's started over the weekend. We had an analyst in the Midwest talking to a brewer in the Northeast about better understanding RTDs and what's happening there and what is being seen as an additional category of beverage alcohol. And I think like that's and that's happened with distribution. That's happened with retail changes during COVID. I think that's one of the things I appreciate is that it's not just us, sharing these insights, but there is some real time synthesis in terms of understanding when that comes to play for people who are putting it into practice, and we get real time feedback on that.
as a reporter, it's so helpful for me to have those discussions kind of always swirling like clouds in my head, because then when some kind of like news moment happens, some story breaks, some new product launches, something like that, it's like, oh, this makes sense for XYZ, or this is weird because XYZ. Because you have, I have these like kind of meta storylines and insights going on in the back of my head. So rarely does something not connect to those, does some news event not connect to those larger themes in a way that like makes it part of the whole.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's the beauty of this sort of constant synthesis, is that we're always paying attention. And then eventually things start to fall in place through conversations or interactions, and they start to click, and you're like, oh, I see how this connects, and I can show that to people. That's really the magic of just being constantly invested in a continuous way in a space like this.
What I'm hearing is that we can't turn it off.
No breaks.
My hard seltzer dreams, that's what,
Completely normal. Do you not count White Claw Surge in your head now?
Jumping over the fence, yeah.
I mean, one of the other ways in which I think we pay attention in a unique way is this sort of counter narrative approach that we take sometimes, because our mission and our goal is always to provide really accurate, good decision-making kind of insight for people. And so, we're often generating that ahead of the narrative or ahead of the curve. But sometimes the narrative gets out in front, right? And we see that all the time, especially in beer, where people are really relying on storytelling and anecdotal data. And they start to derive false insights from that. And that's something that I think we have an overdeveloped sense of accuracy or justice sometimes. And so when we see these narratives getting ahead of things, it kind of gets our hackles up a little bit. And we feel like we need to clarify for everyone what's actually going on. And one of those examples this year, which I think everybody's going to be familiar with, is sort of this optimistic hope that after the pandemic, we're going to have a roaring 20s like comeback in the economy, and especially in bars and restaurants. Like, we're all just going to be hanging out of windows for the next 6 months. And my God, we just started seeing it everywhere. Kate, I think you were maybe the first one to really key in on like how prevalent this narrative was. And
interviews, and I was like, are we? Like, I'm looking around, I'm like still in my pajamas, just hanging out with my dog. I'm like, am I behind? What's happening?
I want to make sure every economist, professional, certified, degree economist, said no. Like over and over. Not that there wasn't going to be a big comeback, but that over and over again, it was 2022 is going to be the year we get back to normal. 2021 is going to look real good because it was basically going 0 to 60. But man, I remember having those conversations with you, Kate, where it's like it built up over a few weeks where we're just kind of like taking notes. It's like, because like I really don't understand where that's coming from right
now. Yeah. I mean, you started to interrogate that narrative pretty hard, and like, that might seem harmless to some people, like, oh, people are just being optimistic or whatever. But in our line of business, if people are making decisions based on that kind of optimism, they're setting themselves up for tragedy potentially. They could start to increase expenditure in their marketing, or renovate a tap room that isn't going to be filled, or they could start introducing products that aren't going to have a place on the shelf. Because just as everybody was talking about the Roaring 20s coming back and all of this revenue that they were hoping to see, we also knew that there was a huge spring shelf set reset coming for grocery stores and mass chain retail that was not adding a single new beer for the first time ever. It was all FMBs. And so if you're counting on that shelf space being there for you, you're going to get hit, but on both sides. Your retail is not going to be what you're expecting it to be. It's going to be much harder to kind of elbow your way in, especially permanently if you got any sort of temporary placements during the pandemic. But also, like, you can't just expect your tap room to flip the lights back on and be pre-pandemic revenue. It's just not going to be that way. And so people were setting themselves up with this false narrative in a way that could have real consequences for them. And that's where I think we saw more than just a chance to take down a false narrative. Like, we really felt a sense of duty to kind of correct that narrative and make sure people were thinking clearly about the near future.
It's not, sometimes I feel like a little bit of an Eeyore on those stories. But I think
I was going to say we are optimistic.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was going to add is that, we are talking about a recovery. We are talking about a return to the on-premise, but like, let's be very clear about that timeline. because that's going to matter for how you're setting forecasts and making decisions and what the timeline for those decisions are. We want to fill 10,000 kegs. Cool. Should you do that this spring? Should you do that next winter, next spring? Like those timelines matter. We will get there, but obviously timing is everything.
Yeah. When you're pursuing a story where you're going to kind of interrogate an assumption or something anecdotal like that, where do you usually start? Like where's the first place you start poking around the edges of a narrative that seems to be taking over the media like that?
Well, I want to see what pieces of evidence those arguments are citing. Like, okay, so I keep hearing this Roaring '20s thing. Like, what does that mean? And why are people thinking that? And then they're like the legs of a chair. It's like, okay, so these are the supports for this Roaring '20s narrative. What if this one, like, let's look at this one leg. Does that hold? No? Okay, what about this other leg? Oh, it's based on this like weird misreading of some economic data. Okay, that one doesn't hold either, or we're talking about, so with the '20s, for example, it's like, we're talking about vaccines going into arms. Perfect. Like by summer, we're good. And I'm like, what about this, like 40% of the population, that 40% of Republican voting white men who say they won't get vaccinated? Like that is not an insignificant portion of the population. That's about 25% of people overall would not say they won't get vaccinated. Like that. Okay. So that leg is shaky, maybe. Like, let's go to one of these other legs. Economic spending, consumer spending rebounding. Long-term unemployment is still really dicey. And there are a lot of under or unemployed people still. And those are young people who are huge drivers of consumer spending. Okay. That leg is shaky. So it's kind of like, I go to see what the assumptions are based on and then see how strong those foundations are.
Yeah. And then Bryan, when you're looking at data, like what are you looking for that is more than just a data point, but actually starts to reconstruct the new correct assumptions that Kate is actively undermining on the other side of that stool?
Yeah. I think this is also a good reason why she and I work so well together too. She's bringing some of that insight, and the things that I'm looking at are kind of the complementary quantitative stuff. So, I think it's easy to start with something like IRI sales data, which pulls information from chain retail stores. And it is also, as I often tell people, like reflective of the largest swath of purchasers in the country. So we're talking about average Jane and average Joe consumers. And so when I see little changes there, that matter. And one of the things that I've relied on a few times for some of the more expansive studies that we've done with Sightlines has actually been academic data. Yeah. One of the things that has fascinated me going back a few years now is the increasing amount of PhD white paper research that can show us both where things match up with the narratives that we see and the data that I see, and kind of come together in the middle to really kind of bolster it with rigorous academic study. So like, for example, one of the things that we recently looked down in Sightlines was, the value and the importance of locally sourced ingredients. And there was an academic study out of Michigan that showed brewers had high interest in terms of using locally grown hops, but that didn't exactly play out based on other research on what consumers really cared about. So to get to the actionable item of what we were presenting to people is that if you're spending a premium on these ingredients, but consumers ultimately care about the flavor experience derived from it, there's savings that can go somewhere else.
Right.
You can still give what they want, and you can still live up to your ethos and business plan and what your mission is.
What I loved about that story was that it was you helping people connect the dots between their spend and what consumers want. So you ultimately came back to them with a story that was basically like, not like that, but definitely like this if you're still interested. And it just gave them a different way to think about it and channel some of those priorities and accomplish their goals without just spending dumb money. And I thought that was really insightful. I mean, if people are interested in learning more about this, I'll show you in our on our site here. you can go to goodbeerhunting.com/sightlines. That's where you'll find a lot of the freemium content. And then there's going to be a link there that you can click onto that says subscribe to premium, where you can find all of the deeper analysis and work that Bryan and Kate are talking about that we're currently engaged in. It's never ending. Every week there's sort of a new way, a new angle to be exploring, some new insights to develop and share. I'll give you guys a peek at what I'm thinking about next, that I'm going to need your help with, which is basically looking at time periods of national division and unity and how that relates to certain kinds of beer styles when it comes to things like light lager. I'm finding a correlation between when political divide started in the 80s and when Budweiser started to shit the bed a little bit. So I'm curious about how that correlates to certain kinds of drinking over time, as a potential brand and sort of market opportunity for any kind of upswing that could be exploited right now. But I think that's sort of like and I could be completely proven wrong, but it's sort of like it's the inkling that starts a deeper questioning that I really enjoy from these conversations, some of which ends up as editorial, some of which just stays in the back of our minds as hypothesis that cannot ever possibly be proven false or true. Wait,
I want to walk through this in real time.
Yeah.
Say, so your idea is that if we look at geographic locations and willingness to be unified politically in a way,
I'm looking at sort of the macro level, looking at the history of political divisions. And I'm just showing you how to get to Sightlines now. If you go to goodbeerhunting.com/sightlines and click on subscribe to premium, you'll sort of see the overview of how we do things there. But the point is, the thing I'm looking at is the history of of unity or division politically, and how that has coincided with, perhaps completely coincidentally, the rise or fall of specific categories of alcohol. Not breaking it down by state, but just looking at national unity. Because we talk from a brand perspective. I'll come at it as we tend to talk about national unity in terms of brands like Coke and Pepsi, right? These things that we all drank once. Budweiser was very much a brand that relied on sort of this idea that this is the beer that we all drink as Americans, and you could even see it in their sort of continued hope in their marketing, is that if we can just bring everybody together and act like one big middle of a country again, everybody maybe will start drinking Budweiser again, which is the same kinds of stories they always rely on. And so it begs the question of, is that possible again during a time of national division? And if we start to turn the corner on that at any point, does that provide a new potential upswing for some of these larger macro brands that rely on large swaths of the country all wanting to take part in the same thing? Or is that just a macro phase that's over, that'll never exist again? Is sort of the question.
It's really interesting because I immediately start thinking about its demographic and economic data, because that is very much tied into what we would place as aspects of unity, either politically or just emotionally.
Yeah.
And if you look
you're putting the cart further back than I am to the horse I'm trying to attach it to, which is, well, what causes national unity and division? So a little bit of chicken and egg there, but very much in correlation.
Money and people.
Yeah.
Right. Well, no. So I'm gonna. Can I go down this rabbit hole?
I'm not in charge of the clock, so yeah.
We'll set a 5-minute cutoff. And Kate, jump in with me this.
My mental springboard has like Reagan on one side, like Budweiser over here. Like I don't know.
No, that's the thing, is because if you look at both, if you think about it in terms of both economic prosperity, times of recession, that actually has impacts on the way that we consume certain kind of alcoholic products. It is not as easy as just saying, well, there's less money, so people are drinking cheaper, because even if you look at the last 3 years, one of the most telltale signs, just in those 3 years, this goes back further, is the premiumization trend. So like right now, over the last 18 months, I'm going to get even smaller, is that, premium products across beverage alcohol categories have all seen a big boost. And if you look at the 3 or 4 categories of beer, which include beer categories, it's imports, it's craft beer, and it's premium plus. So that is to say, imports, Corona, Modelo, craft beer, which we all can figure out locally and regionally, nationally. Premium Plus is Michelob Ultra. All three of those have shown the most significant growth at higher price points.
Mm-hmm.
And even hard seltzer sits at what, a $13 to $15 12-pack and rarely goes on sale. And I think this comes back to where we started at when we think about unity and where I'm going in terms of demographics and economics is, again, like, it comes to this place where there is a large menagerie of human beings who are drinking more things. So are we talking about a singular brand? Maybe not.
But so I'm going back to some of the earlier research you did maybe a year and a half ago that was basically around the politics of craft beer and how they actually lean. And I was comparing that to some research I was just looking at that started back in the 80s where people were asked to give a favorability rating of their own political party versus the other political party. And it used to be like pretty middling, right? Like everybody was like basically in favor of their own. They thought they were good guys. And everybody else was like trying to be a good guy and like they were just wrong. And then it just started to split where everybody's opinion of their own party stayed the same and their opinion of the other party just started to tank into this level in which you could only be considered highly divisive. And that reminds me of the way in which we talk about lots of brands, right? Like if you're of one political persuasion, you shop at Walmart, and if you're the other, you shop at Target. And I bet everybody automatically knows how those would align just based on their own personal perception. And that's kind of where I'm going with this is like during this time of division, can you have enough people drinking one brand like Budweiser for it to be considered a unified brand? And will it ever return to a position or an opportunity where that could be the case? And that's sort of what I'm fascinated in learning more about is there an opportunity with either understanding that that's never coming back, or can you potentially start to think about a near future in which some unity might make more ground again, if that's even possible in our country? And if it does, what opportunity does that represent for a unifying kind of brand, quote unquote, something we all drink? At this point right now, it's White Claw. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but that's kind of where my head's at.
Do you want to talk about the unifying brand of ranch water?
Let's all, I think we can all, my fellow Americans, agree that ranch water is delicious. Yeah.
There's a good chunk of people that think it's literally dressing.
Yeah, I do ask that with some sincerity. I mean, because it's all in waves, right? And right now, ranch water is huge.
But that's because it's brand new and no one has hangups about it, right? Like, there was probably a time when people did not have like cultural political significance attached to Budweiser, whereas now it's like pickup trucks, American flags, like whatever that means to you. But like ranch water, people barely know what it is, so no one has hangups about it yet. It's just a cool thing from Texas. So yes, quick and dirty on ranch water. It's a cocktail from West Texas. The idea, the birth of it, is that you're drinking, a rancher is drinking a bottle of Topo Chico, just mineral water, takes a swig out of it, fills that volume up with tequila, you drop in a lime, ranch water. So now there are canned versions of this, both of a hard seltzer and a tequila-based RTD variety, and they're rolling out nationally as we speak. The race is on to kind of be the biggest brand in ranch water. And I think that's where the advantage is in terms of that being something kind of unifying or across the board, is that there are no hangups about it. Bryan's done a lot of writing on this about the idea that like these emerging categories of FMBs and RTDs are kind of agnostic in terms of their cultural implications. Like hard seltzer, just everyone drinks it. Like it's not a guys, girls, old, young, like you can bring that to any kind of a backyard party knowing zero about the demographics and like you're good. Which is highly, I mean, how many things I can't even pick a playlist for my parties, like everything is so complicated. Hard seltzer, things like ranch water are easy across.
I just love that 99% of people are going to try their first ranch water and it's going to be the simulacra seltzer version of what a ranch water actually is. And they'll never know because the space is moving so fast.
Mm-hmm.
But
they're good though. I mean,
It's delicious. It's a great flavor experience.
And
it's limey, it's bubbly. Yeah.
the category's done like, I don't know, $3 million worth of sales in the first 3 months of 2021.
Right.
It's not even in all of its.
And it's Texas.
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah. Well, and it does. It's not like it has. And what's interesting about ranch water is it's not like it has no. It's not like hard seltzer wherein it's nothing to everyone. Like it has no provenance. It has no origin. Ranch water has a place that it's from, but that place is exportable, apparently nationally, globally, whatever.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the first time somebody in the Midwest, especially the upper Midwest, comes out with a ranch dressing flavored ranch water just to further confuse the potential upside of this market.
I am not looking forward to that.
It would taste great with pizza. I don't know. I don't know what your problem is.
I hate fun and flavor experience. That's a flavor experience. That's what that is.
I appreciate you all, I suppose, sharing the process with some folks that may not, if you've never been a part of an editorial process or an editorial team, or you read the news and analysis and you wonder how it comes together, it's a very human process. I mean, we try and build it very strongly around data and insights that are verifiable, and we create narratives that are believable and help you make decisions. But these are the people that make it, and this is how it gets made. And it's a constant dialogue and curiosity more than anything, which helps us interrogate our own assumptions. It helps us interrogate narratives we see in the media that we think are maybe a little flimsy, but all with the goal of giving our readership something very firm to stand on and make some good decisions by. And if you're not a decision maker or a beverage company, it gives you a sense of how people are thinking about these categories and why certain things are showing up on the shelf in the way that they are, when they are, with the kind of communication that they have. It's because of this constant sort of dialogue that's happening in the industry. And we love being a point of synthesis for all of that, between reporting and analysis and some real world experience of our studio side. So Bryan and Kate, thanks for sharing all that. I appreciate it.
Thanks for giving me my Independence Day assignment for this whole Budweiser political humor.
Bryan, how do humans work? That's what I want to know about beverage alcohol right now, is how do humans work?
Bryan-sized hole appears through the wall.
All right. Well, thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks for having us.